Have you ever thought about starting your own podcast? Well, we've got the information for you right here. And Dave's going to tell you about it.
Absolutely, guys. We use this awesome application called Anchor FM. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. First off, it's free.
And who doesn't like free?
Yeah, free's huge. That's what got us involved with it. Second of all, there's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or your computer. So you don't need all those fancy gadgets. You can have them if you want them, but not absolutely necessary.
Anchor will also distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and many other platforms.
Which is great. More people can hear us.
Who doesn't want more people to hear us?
I mean, I like to be heard.
I like to talk.
Another great thing is you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. Like 0 people could listen to you and you could still possibly make some money.
That's amazing.
How does that even happen? It's everything you need right here to make a podcast in one place.
It's a one-stop shop and it's all you need. Anchor FM.
Yeah, so you guys, if you want to start this podcast, go to anchorfm.com to get started. What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Apogee Podcast. My name is David Carter.
And my name is Kevin Harrington.
Dude, Kevin, I think I'm still a little sore from that workout we had in P-ville last Saturday. That was literally a week ago.
It was painful to watch.
Dude, my biceps, my lats.
I was proud of you, though. I mean,
Thank
you kept up with them. You knew what you were doing, so.
I think I did. My chest to bars were, well, you gave me the whole beard thing, so.
Well, it's got to grow a little bit longer.
Yeah. No, I was happy with my performance.
You did good. Thank you. I got pictures to prove it, so there you go.
Thank you. Did anything fun this week?
I took more pictures of the Apogee athletes getting their belts made at Blitz Belts.
Right, over at Blitz Belts.
Yes.
One of our sponsors. Love it.
What did you do this week?
Dude, I just worked, healed one body, one person at a time. Let's get into today's guest.
Yes, let's.
All right, so today we've got Dr. Steve Kornweiss. He works out over at Swamp Rabbit CrossFit. He's a pretty interesting guy. First of all, he did his undergrad at Johns Hopkins University, where he majored in neuroscience. After that, he moved on to medical school, where he did that at Temple University in Philadelphia. After that, he completed his residency via emergency medicine at Thomas Jefferson University Hospital. Dr. Steve has always been a fitness enthusiast, stemming from cycling to CrossFit. Being so involved in the fitness world, he has primed his medical expertise in medical preventative care. We are super excited to have Dr. Steve on the podcast to learn more about his background and to answer your questions regarding medical facts and myths.
All right, so we're going to jump right into
the fitness industry.
Yes, the fitness industry.
The fitness industry.
I like to step on you when you talk sometimes.
No,
I apologize.
That's okay. You have a really nice voice.
Thanks.
Yeah. Dr. Steve, what's up, man?
How are you guys doing?
Doing
Good.
all right. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on.
Man.
It is an honor and a very extra kind introduction there. Thank you.
Well, you're a very smart guy.
Well, we'll see.
Okay.
So is this your first podcast?
This is, in fact, my first podcast.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
2 weeks in a row.
Thank you.
Dude, we're on a roll.
Yeah. Paolo's first one, and now Dr. Steven
We're just
Kornweiss.
making people famous left and right. Yeah. Dude, so do you listen to other podcasts?
I do listen to other podcasts.
What podcast are you listening to right now?
I've been listening to the same few podcasts for a while now. Probably my most favorite podcast is Peter Attia's The Drive. He's a physician who I look up to very much. I listen to Jocko Podcast. You guys know Jocko Willing?
Yeah, very much so.
I listen to that. I just recently started listening to Dan Carlin's Hardcore History.
Okay, yep. So Harrison got me introduced to that one.
That is excellent.
Yep.
It's the first time in my life that I felt genuinely interested in history. He really integrates things across different time periods and different aspects of history.
I love history.
History is important.
It's very important.
I struggle with this topic a lot with like students who come and shadow us at work, right? I always ask them about, what are you learning in school? Did you learn anything today? What's your favorite subject? And they all, like almost across the board, everybody hates history. But it's not, I always say, you don't hate history. You just hate memorizing dates. That's what you hate,
Correct.
right? Like, there's so much more to history than just memorizing what date was the Civil War. All right, Dr. Steve, tell us a little bit about your upbringing. Where are you from? What kind of family life did you have growing up?
My upbringing was pretty great. I grew up in central Pennsylvania in a town called Hummelstown. It's next to Hershey, pretty close to Harrisburg, which is the capital. And had a pretty great childhood, really great parents who supported me and gave me everything I needed to succeed in life. And yeah.
Did you eat a lot of chocolate growing up, being that you're so close to proximity to Hershey, Pennsylvania?
Probably no more than any other person.
Interesting.
Well,
That's not a fair answer. I feel like there's a lot of different people out there.
Yeah,
I
that's
love
true.
chocolate.
It's not like there's an abundance of chocolate just overflowing from every nook and cranny in Hershey.
It's not like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory over in Hershey.
I would say no. Yeah.
Speaking of history, there's a lot of history of chocolate people in Hershey, Pennsylvania, though.
Really?
Yes.
I've never been.
But that's another story.
So, did you play sports growing up?
I did.
What did you play?
I played soccer.
Left or right-footed?
Right.
Nice.
Right-footed, yeah. I could pass effectively with my left foot. I could not shoot well with the left foot. And I played tennis. I played tennis in high school. I also did martial arts.
Awesome.
And that's about it. I mean, I did other things recreationally, but those were the only things I did competitively. And I didn't do martial arts competitively. I just trained.
Awesome. So, at what point in your childhood or your schooling did you figure out, hey, I like science, I'm very interested in the medical side, I want to become a doctor?
It was a long time before I decided to go into medicine. That wasn't until late in my college career. So that was not something that I thought of early on.
What did you originally go to college for? I mean, what was your major course of study?
I originally went to the engineering school at Johns Hopkins, and then I ended up switching into neuroscience. But my academic path was a little bit meandering. In high school, I really loved biology and computer programming. I don't know about you guys, but I did well. I was always a hard worker, and so I did well in every class, but the only ones that I really loved to the point where I would do something extra or spend time outside of school or outside of assignments and pursue more work was in biology and computer programming. And there were only 3 computer programming classes available in my high school, and I ended up doing an independent study. And I thought I would go to college for computer science, but I ended up starting out in the engineering school at Johns Hopkins, and that didn't go as planned. It was extremely, extremely challenging. High school, I worked hard, but it wasn't that hard.
Sure, yeah.
And then when I got to college and started taking engineering courses and college level physics and calculus 3, it was hard. It was very challenging. And I didn't really know where I was headed with it, so I wasn't as motivated as I should have been. And so after the first 3 semesters of that, I started thinking, do I really want to continue to pursue this? I took a chemical engineering course, which did not, I was not passionate about that topic. And so we had this thing called winter session or intersession in between spring and fall semester of second year. And I decided to take a neuroscience course because I thought that was an interesting sort of blend of my 2 prior interests, computer programming, computer science, and biology. And I knew immediately after that class that was going to be my passion. So I switched to neuroscience major and did really well, enjoyed it. But I was, still a college student, and I was pretty short-sighted. So I was just trying to get from class to class,
right,
semester to semester, and not really. I wasn't mature enough to think long-term at that point. So the second, it feels like the second you get a handle on something, now you're hit with a new decision. So you get a few good semesters under your belt, and then it's like, okay, college is coming to an end. What are you going to do now? And then I didn't have the force, the ability to think ahead and say, what am I going to do with my neuroscience knowledge? And it became clear that there were 2 pathways that you could sort of head with that, and it's research and medicine. And so I tried research, and I have a huge amount of respect for research scientists because that is an incredibly difficult career. You have to be really patient, really detail oriented, and I did not enjoy working in the research lab. So I shadowed in medicine, and I decided that was something I could do.
So how did you go about like a research lab at Johns Hopkins, or did you have a job outside of school? that you were doing research with?
No, there's a lot of professors on,
Sure.
on campus, and so there are research labs on campus right there, and I just asked around and found a lab, and I actually got to do some computer programming and data analysis in that lab, which I enjoyed, but
Was that part of post-undergraduate work, or was that during undergraduate?
I did that during undergraduate work. I think I did some of it during the semester, some of it during the summer. I didn't put a huge amount of time in. I was still mainly focused on my coursework, but I put in enough time to get a feel for research.
To understand that.
What was the disconnect between engineering, but the connect between neuroscience? What was the one missing and the other one wasn't missing?
I think that with I probably, in retrospect, I probably just didn't give engineering enough of a chance. By the time I got to the third semester of college, I was already just frustrated. And then my first true engineering course was a chemical engineering course. And at least the way I remember it was that they're sort of giving you these arbitrary reaction problems to solve. And I don't know, it's not like I came up with, hey, this is something I would like to know or something I would like to do, and let me figure it out. It's, here are some reactants, what are the products? And they were complicated things to solve. And it just seemed arbitrary and impractical to me. I didn't know what to do with it, but there was just a pure intellectual fascination and curiosity that I had with understanding how the brain works to the extent that it's understood. It seemed just more directly usable in my everyday life.
It's amazing. I think I watch a lot of, my wife is a doctor, and so I watch a lot of medical stuff, medical history stuff. She could care less because that's what she does. I don't say that lightly and cavalier. I'm just like, hey, watch this. She goes, I know. But I just find it, like, for me, on like just the average guy level, I think it's very interesting. We were talking before about just genetics and stuff, and genetics plays a huge role in sports performance and stuff like that. So, yeah, the synapses in the brain.
I took a course. The entire course was called synapses, or I think it was called the synapse. So the entire course for the semester was just on the synapse.
Wow.
Which, like, for the listener, if they don't know, is the quote unquote space in between two neurons, or between one nerve cell and the next. That space is called the synapse.
I want to take it back to college, undergrad. All right, so it seems like you were very busy studying and
True.
Getting excellent grades.
For the most part. It didn't start out that way.
Did you find any time to have fun?
I did, yes.
What kind of stuff were you doing in college?
Well, I think what you're trying to get me to say here is that I ended up joining a fraternity.
There you go. Which fraternity did you join?
I was in Alpha Epsilon Pi.
Okay.
For, I guess, 2 years or 2.5 years. I ended up leaving early.
Yeah. You had to be too focused.
Sorry, AEPI. But yeah, I found it challenging to make friends and have a good social situation in college. Johns Hopkins is a relatively small school, and the social scene there is pretty, I don't know what it's like now. I assume it's similar. But when I was there, the social hub of campus was the library. So the library had an above ground level, and then it had 3 below ground levels. And as you went deeper, as you descended into the depths of the library, it became more and more intense. So M level, main level of the library, was where you went to socialize, because there was what do you call it? The student center, or
student union?
I don't even know what it's called, because I think I was in it once on our camp. Nobody ever went to that place. Everyone spent their time at the library. And then if you were a C or D level library person, you typically were not a part of any social situation. You were just in the library.
You were there to learn.
If you were an M, A, or B level person, then there was a chance that you socialized. And if you, quote unquote, by socializing, we all know what that means in college. It's typically partying. And so that was dominated by the Greek scene. And so if you wanted to try to meet new people or go to parties or whatever, you oftentimes ended up joining a fraternity. You didn't have to, but... So I did that. That was good. I met people, made friends. And then after I felt a little more secure and had my own path, I left.
I hear you. So
I can take it from here.
So yeah, right.
I got it. I can take it from here. I got it, really.
So in retrospect, are you happy that you went to an Ivy League like Johns Hopkins, or do you wish you went somewhere more awesome like the University of Michigan?
Well,
because I know that's where your sister went, right?
so just to set the record straight, she did go there. Johns Hopkins is not an Ivy League.
Oh, it's not. Okay, I always thought it was.
But at least when I was there, we liked to think that it was probably harder than some Ivy League schools.
It's an
at
upper
least
echelon
academically.
school. I mean,
Yeah,
when you
for
say
sure.
Johns Hopkins, that has a breadth and a weight behind
Yeah.
it.
It was a good school. I'd say the professors there are amazing, and you get good learning. But the thing I learned most was just how to learn and how to work hard, because I did not know that before I got to college.
Right, yeah,
So that was the most
absolutely.
important thing I learned.
Yeah, my wife mentored a student from Johns Hopkins over the summer. Like it was like her final year or whatever. And my wife's a general practitioner, and so she just came down. Her family was here, and so for the time she came and mentored her, and it's a huge thing. I was like, wow, Johns Hopkins.
That's what I always say. I always say high school you learn how to memorize and regurgitate. College you learn how to learn.
Yeah,
At least hopefully you do learn how to learn.
I think it's mostly up to the individual. Unfortunately, I didn't have external challenges enough to make me figure out how to learn and work really hard in high school. But I think you could do that to you could challenge yourself and introduce those challenges. And I was forced to do that in college. And now it's totally self-directed, which is ideal, right? You don't want to have
absolutely.
external force. You want to be able to manufacture that motivation and constant pressure on yourself internally.
So after graduating medical school, you went on to do your residency in emergency medicine. How did you choose that?
That was another process. Did not know that I wanted to do emergency medicine. I'll try to keep it somewhat brief,
Sure.
the story. But basically the first 2 years of medical school at most schools are spent in the classroom, and you're just learning primarily anatomy, physiology, pathology. And then year 3, sometimes you get some hospital exposure earlier on depending on the school and the curriculum. But then year 3, you start doing clinical rotation. So that's when you get an actual taste of what it's like to be an internal medicine physician or a pediatrician, OBGYN, surgeon, do all these different rotations, and you actually work with those teams and see everything they do, and you help as much as you can. And so I went through all those rotations third year, and I still didn't really know what I wanted to do. I liked most things. There were a couple things I knew I definitely didn't want to do, but I liked most things. And in fact, I really liked pathology. I thought I would be a pathologist. You guys know what pathologists do?
Yep.
So I did a pathology rotation at the NIH because pathology is not a typical rotation. It's not a standard rotation. You have to do it as an elective, at least at my school. And so I went to NIH to do my pathology rotation. And on pathology rounds, typically in medicine, rounds refers to when you go around and see all your patients. And in pathology, there's no patients to see. So rounds are you sit at a microscope that has multiple heads, and the pathologist loads a slide and then, scans around on the slide and explains things and asks questions, and everybody looks at it and tries to figure out what's going on with the slide. And I would constantly fall asleep on pathology rounds, and it's a multiple headed microscope, but it's physically connected. So the eyepiece that I'm looking through is connected by mirrors and physical structure connected to the pathologist's eyepiece, essentially. So I fell asleep and hit my head on the eyepiece. Not every day, but a lot of days. And after a few days, I learned to just rest my head on it so that when I fell asleep, there would be less of a
Boy.
and bless these pathologists. They were the nicest, brilliant, and the nicest people in the world, because no one ever said a thing to me.
Wow.
No one said a thing. And there's no way that they didn't notice.
Sure.
Yeah. So just to finish up the story, I figured out I needed to be doing something that was a little more action-packed, and then I ended up doing my ER rotation, and those guys were just heroes to me. I mean, they could handle anything. The emergency department at Temple in Philadelphia was just pure chaos most of the time, and these guys are just totally calm, and they can handle whatever comes in. So I thought, that's what I want to be like that.
That's awesome. So what brought you to Greenville, South Carolina?
My wife. So we finished residency the same year, she's a clinical pharmacist, and she did critical care pharmacy training, and we finished residency the same year. We stayed in Philadelphia for a few months, and then she found a job in Spartanburg, South Carolina, and we came down here to check it out, and we both got good job offers, so we decided to move. We like the area.
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, welcome. We're glad you're here.
Thank you. It's awesome.
Makes the whole area a lot smarter.
So did you find CrossFit before or after you moved here?
Before. I started doing CrossFit in medical school, and the main reason was efficiency. So before that, the main form of exercise I did was road cycling. I got into road cycling in college, and I was on the club team. And then when I got to medical school and started doing those clinical rotations in third year, you run out of time. First and second year, there's actually a lot of free time. You know, there's usually only a few hours of class time per day, and then you have the rest of the day to budget to studying. But if you could go to class for 4 hours, study for 4 hours, and that's still only 8. So you could go ride your bike for a few hours still. So I did that. But then third year, you could be in the hospital for 12, 14, 16 plus hours a day, plus commuting, and just being constantly exhausted. So I needed a more efficient way to work out. So I turned to the internet and discovered, I'm typing in like, what's the most efficient workout? And so that was the first time I heard about CrossFit. And then I found out it was a classmate of mine named Joe England, who's one of my closest friends now, who was doing CrossFit at his house, and he had a garage gym. And so one day after an exam, I went up to him and asked, hey, what's up with CrossFit? And can I come to a workout sometime? And he said, we're going to do one right now. So I went to his house, and that was it.
Were you hooked day one?
Yeah, I was like, this makes sense.
Do you remember what it was?
No, I don't. We did most of our programming ourselves. So I think probably, I don't honestly remember what we did on day one. He probably would. He remembers everything. But it was probably just him showing me some movements with barbell, Olympic bar lifting, which I had never done. And he got me, doing gymnastic kipping and some other ring work and stuff pretty early on. So he was probably just showing me some different lifts, and we would usually program our own strength and training and metcons and stuff like that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's pretty similar to what I did in grad school as well. So you moved to Greenville, you started your new job, and then you were like, I wanna find an actual CrossFit box to join.
Yeah.
So, and then you found Swamp Rabbit?
Yeah, well, we were living downtown in an apartment building, and it's like a 5-minute walk from the apartment building to Swamp Rabbit CrossFit. Mm-hmm. And I went there early on. I've been in and out of that CrossFit box, just depending on what's convenient with the rest of my schedule. So yeah, but I love Swamp Rabbit CrossFit, and everyone over there is super nice and awesome.
So when did you become interested in being a more of a functional medicine doctor?
So I'll say at the outset, I certainly don't want to come off as negative or critical towards functional medicine movement at all, but I'm not a functional medicine physician. So the way I would put it is that I started, my training's in emergency medicine, and I started my own practice, and I wanted to use that practice to focus on diagnostic and preventive medicine. So in emergency medicine, I think most people know we have our resources and setup are dedicated to dealing with emergencies and stabilizing people, making emergent diagnoses, but oftentimes we don't have the time or the ability to send more detailed tests or spend enough time with the person to get to the root cause of their problem. And certainly we don't have time, usually, I have done it on occasion, but usually don't have time to get into nutrition plans or training plans or anything like that. So I really wanted to be able to do those things. And I also wanted my own vehicle for learning more in medicine. There's always more to learn in emergency medicine, but I wanted to learn more and I wanted to be able to help people outside the hospital as well, which as a hospital employee, you're kind of only set up to, even though you're an emergency physician or whatever kind of physician, you know all these things, but in terms of the business aspect and the insurance aspect and just having your own equipment and all this, you're not set up to do things outside the hospital. And people were asking me for help. So I wanted to be able to help people. And so I needed to set up my own practice. And
so how would you define your private practice then?
I would define it as a practice that focuses on diagnostic and preventive medicine.
Okay.
So typically people are coming to me either because they've got a problem that they haven't been able to solve through typical avenues, and or they are looking to make themselves as healthy as they possibly can be right now and for the foreseeable future.
Right. So, I mean, forgive me, but how does that any different than any regular doctor?
It isn't necessarily. I mean, I think each person can define what they do in their own medical practice however they like. I don't want to identify with a particular brand or movement of medicine just because I think there are specific things and schools and teachings associated with these, you know, if you talk about integrative medicine or functional medicine, those things have certain implications. Right. And I just don't have any affiliation or specific training in those realms. So that's why I'm not calling myself one of those labels, if that makes sense.
Okay. So you're basically the final straw for a patient to some aspect.
Potentially. And one thing that's different is that my business model allows me to have an immense amount of time to spend on each individual client. So a typical practice may have, if we take a typical insurance-based primary care practice, for instance, they may have thousands of patients in their patient panel. My business model is similar to a direct primary care model, so I don't take insurance, and my clients pay me on a membership basis.
So it's more of a concierge medicine?
It has some similarities to concierge medicine.
Okay.
Concierge medicine also has specific business practices that I don't do. So I also can't, you know, people throw these terms around, but if I'm being technical, I can't call myself a concierge medicine physician just because that has certain business implications. But you could think of it that way in the sense that people are paying me a membership, typically a monthly membership fee, and my job is to constantly be thinking about them and figuring out what I can do to help them on a daily basis.
So does that make you, I guess in another term, a 24-hour doctor availability to them?
Yeah, they know that I'm still my clients know I'm still an emergency physician.
Right.
And I have some clients that are not local, so they're not expecting me to be available for, physically available to them for emergencies. But yeah, my clients can call me, text me, email me 24/7, and I get back to them most of the time. My local clients know that if I'm working in the emergency department and they need something physically, that I'm not going to be available instantly. But if I'm not in the emergency department, I usually am available to them. So yeah, I have a lot of availability to my clients. I have a very small practice, so I'm able to devote a huge amount of time to each person. And then the way that I like to practice is to plan and think ahead for my clients the way that I do for myself. So one thing that I noticed in medicine is that doctors get a little bit of extra privilege than other people. I have access to things. I have access to knowledge, people, resources that other people don't have. And I was thinking and doing a lot of things for myself that other people aren't, able to do so easily. So if your clients in my practice are able to benefit from those types of things as well.
What are some examples of that?
So an example, a simple example that doesn't really involve any labs or medical stuff is nutrition tracking. So, you had Cara Petrozelli on your podcast. She mentioned, there was some debate over the pronunciation of this, chronometer or chronometer, but it's an app that's used to track nutrition. So one of the things I started doing a little over a year ago was periodically tracking my nutrition and analyzing my macro and micronutrient intake, and using that to help me with my recovery and my training, and also just my metabolic health to prevent long-term development of chronic disease as best as possible, and using that data in conjunction with laboratory data to further individualize my own nutrition. And that's hard to do. I certainly haven't arrived in terms of maximizing the potential of that, but I think there is a lot of potential there, and it requires a lot of time and a lot of knowledge and constantly learning, and it's an iterative process. So that's not something that I don't think that's something that's easy to find.
I want to ask you a question. So a lot of people, I don't want to bash the medical field at all, but I feel like a lot of people put doctors at a high pedestal, right? And they know everything when it comes to the body. That's what people assume. Why do you feel like, especially since nutrition has become so big over the last 10 years or so, everybody's saying nutrition is medicine, right? And from a lot of what we've studied, nutrition has become very huge for how the body functions, what goes in the body, comes out in inflammation or comes out in productivity, right? How much training do medical students actually get in nutrition at medical school?
Very little.
And why do you think that is? Do you think that's going to change?
I think it probably will change to some extent, but I think that there's so much to learn. I mean, there's too much to learn, really. Mm-hmm. So even the best medical student doesn't know everything about anatomy and physiology and pathophysiology. And then after you know all those things out of the books, you then have to learn how to apply them clinically. You have to be able to go to the bedside and communicate effectively with a wide range of people to learn what their symptoms are, and then to perform diagnostic maneuvers, physical exam. Then you have to learn how to order labs and interpret them, and imaging, and then you have to actually learn how to do your job on top of all that, because you're not just managing one patient in an unlimited time period. You're having to know all these things and apply them clinically with limited time frame. Like, for example, me on an emergency shift, on a really busy shift, I could have 12 active patients at one time. Mm-hmm. So in medical school and residency, that's what you're learning how to do. And I think to learn substantive information in the realm of nutrition is not easy. I mean, nutrition, to get any meaningful knowledge in nutrition, is an endeavor unto itself. I mean, that's why there's people like Kara that just study just that.
Right.
And that's why it's taking me years after medical school and residency, and being a practicing physician for a couple of years, spending all of my free time trying to teach myself and learn these things from other experts. It's a years of work to learn that.
Absolutely.
So you'd have to add. I'm sure there are a handful of brilliant, focused geniuses that could fit nutrition into their medical school and somehow learn that very well. That's probably possible, but in terms of most people learning that in medical school, I think it would not be the right thing. It's not. For the way doctors practice medicine right now, it makes more sense for them to hire a dietitian, or to refer their patient to somebody who is a nutrition expert.
Yeah, that's why you have like specialists and stuff. Correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, because my wife's told me this before. She's like, she's a GP, but she also does research doctoring too. But like, she could have been a palliative care doctor, specialized GP that specializes in stuff like that, or GP that specializes in labor and delivery. So I mean, it's time under tension, just like CrossFit, and she didn't have enough time to be a labor and delivery doctor, but she had birthed over 200 children,
Sure.
But she didn't get enough time to have that as a specialty.
Sure.
And so by you saying what you have done is, obviously after you have graduated, you've taken it upon yourself to integrate the nutrition side and the functional side to your practice. I think that speaks volumes about you as a doctor, wanting to take the time with the patient. I've heard the stories, as a husband, in HIPAA, I can't say everything, but you hear the stories, about stuff that comes in there, and it's just like, I think it's a credit to you to want to take the time to spend the time with the patients.
Absolutely. And that's kind of where I was getting at with that prior question, is because I feel like it's a frustration that Harrison and I experience every single day. Is these patients are in their doctor's office, and it's like, I really don't think my doctor knows my name, let alone knows what's going on with me, because he only spent 5 minutes with me. And it's just that medical paradigm right now that is just so hard. So having folks like you who are, kind of taking the leap of faith and going out on their own, starting something where they can really practice true care rather than just diagnosing and medicating, is what I like to call it.
Yeah, well, and you have to also recognize the as frustrated as the patients are, most physicians are just as frustrated.
Right.
It's not like they want to turn these people around in 5 or 10 minutes.
Right.
That's not. Maybe some people do, but I would bet that the majority of family practitioners, general practitioners, internal medicine physicians would prefer if they had 20 or 30 minutes or sometimes more.
Yes.
And had the freedom in their schedule.
Absolutely.
And just unfortunately the way things are set up, that's not how it works. But
Aaron will tell you all the time, they don't teach you business school to doctors.
No. And that's
the
what I always
aspect
tell
of
my
it.
patients. That's what we always tell our patients. We're like, the way our practice is set up is we're meant to spend time with you. That's why they refer you here, right? But in a medical office, they're so busy. They have to have constant turnover on patients. It's not that they don't want to give you the time of day. It's just that the business model isn't set up for that, and it's just a tough situation.
It's a very tough situation. But things are changing. I mean, practices like mine are not unusual anymore.
Mm-hmm.
There's other people in the area who do this as well. There's well over 1,000 practices that are set up this way in the country now, and specifically in primary care.
I think it's awesome.
And that's why I was saying, that's why I just threw concierge out there.
Yeah.
I mean, basically, like you said, you have people that, pay you to be their doctor and stuff. And I mean, to me, it's more hearkening back to a time when you were the doctor for the village, when you had more time, you knew everybody in your village, and you knew what Sam's, he had bunions or he has gout in his knee, or but you knew why, and you could spend the time to make it personal to him. So I think we've gotten away from that as far as some things in life.
It's coming back.
Yeah,
I love it. So moving on from that, let's get into a little bit of some of these questions that have been kind of circulating the fitness world. I think we can all agree within the last 10, 15 years, fitness has become a huge kind of driving force, especially really around the world, but in the United States, people are becoming a little bit more focused on what they're eating, what they're putting in their body, what medications they're taking, etc. But with that, I feel like there's like a lot of myths kind of floating around, or like what people think are facts, which actually aren't true. So
I think we should start. I'm going to jump down a little bit. Let's start with cholesterol.
Yeah, I love talking about cholesterol. Go for it.
There's studies that they're saying the old model of HDL being high and LDL being low, is that still a good model?
For assuming risk of heart and arterial disease development.
I think what you're getting at is that
the big beach ball versus the little beach ball.
Well, yeah. So historically, the way that quote unquote cholesterol has been treated by physicians is you send a standard lipid panel, which will usually give you an LDL cholesterol. It'll give you an HDL cholesterol. It'll give you triglycerides. And then sometimes you'll get some other information here, VLDL, very low density lipoprotein cholesterol. And then sometimes they'll also calculate ratios for you. So you'll get that lipid panel, and then there are normal ranges set for the lipid panel. And typically what you're told is that LDL cholesterol, or cholesterol that's trafficked inside low density lipoproteins, is bad. And HDL cholesterol that's trafficked inside high density lipoproteins, is good. And the reason that people think that is there's evidence that cholesterol specifically from low density lipoproteins, and if you guys want, I can get into more detail explaining what actually are lipoproteins. But cholesterol from low density lipoproteins are found inside plaques in the artery wall.
Yeah, let's explain it all, just because there's so
Start from the beginning.
There's so many different types of people that are listening to this. Just from practicing in physical therapy, there's people that come in our clinic who don't know there's 3 major bones in their leg, so let alone a lipoprotein. So explain that.
So I'll just start at the beginning. So when you eat fat or food, let's just take, let's say you eat a steak, okay? You're going to get some fat and cholesterol from that steak is in your bowel, and it's going to get delivered to the small bowel. So it gets digested down into molecules, and then those molecules make it down to your small bowel. There are cholesterol molecules, and then there's fat molecules, and you need to absorb those into your body. Or I shouldn't say you need to, you're going to absorb those into your body. Because of the way that fats don't dissolve in water very easily, you have to have some way of transporting fat across membranes into cells, and then from that cell into the bloodstream, and then you have to have a way of it traveling in the bloodstream smoothly and sort of dissolving instead of just forming big fat globules and layers of fat. So a lipoprotein is this little, you said beach ball, I guess you could think of it as a little ball or a sphere of fat and protein. So lipo means fat, protein means protein. So the first one that gets formed is in the small bowel cell, which is called the enterocyte, and it's called a chylomicron. So cholesterol gets transported into the enterocyte from your gut, and that can have two sources. It can be dietary, or it can be recycled cholesterol that your liver secreted via the bile, which then goes into your bowel. So you've got multiple sources of cholesterol in the bowel. Those go into the enterocyte along with the fat, and then your enterocyte makes this thing called an apoprotein, apoprotein B, and that causes this globule of fat and protein to form inside the enterocyte, and then that gets dumped into your lymphatic system, and then eventually into your bloodstream, into your circulation. So basically you have this little globule protein and fat that gets dumped into your circulation. Now it goes around to your body, it goes to the liver, it goes to other cells, and it drops things off. It drops off cholesterol, it drops off fat. And then this system has other lipoproteins. So once the chylomicron makes it back to the liver and drops off some cholesterol and fat, these things go into the liver cell and reassemble into other lipoproteins, and one of these lipoproteins is called low-density lipoprotein, and it also has an ApoB particle on the surface, an apolipoprotein B. So this is another type of fat, cholesterol, protein globule that's going around and delivering fat and cholesterol to various cells around the body, and then eventually, hopefully, going back to the liver and getting cleared. And this whole system has multiple feedback loops. But what can happen when something goes wrong is one of these ApoB particles, typically low-density lipoprotein, can get into the artery wall. And there's some debate as to exactly how that happens and what causes it. There's probably multiple ways that it happens and multiple possible causes, but when that gets into the artery wall, it can set off an inflammatory cascade, and that is the way that it's thought that plaques develop, and that's atherosclerosis. And when those plaques rupture, it can cause heart attacks and strokes and other problems too. But the things that people talk about most are heart attacks and strokes. It can happen in basically any artery of the body, but those are the two most notable places. So that the bad cholesterol, that the cholesterol in these plaques came from LDL particles, because you can run tests and find that there's the ApoB protein. Mm-hmm. So HDL particles have an ApoA protein on them. It's a different protein. So you can tell which kind of particle made it into the artery wall. And so scientists found that it's the LDL or these ApoB subclass of particles that make it into the artery wall. And so that's why historically it's thought that LDL particles are bad. And then people believed for a long time that HDL particles are responsible for reverse cholesterol transport. So now you've got let's say you've got cholesterol in places you don't want it. Some of it got into the artery wall. People think that HDL particles can go retrieve some of that cholesterol out of the artery wall, bring it back to the liver, and put it someplace safe, like a liver cell or some other cell in the body, or get rid of it through the bowels, potentially.
I should have brought you my lipid panel. I have one. I've had it done twice.
So the problem with a traditional lipid panel is that it gives you very limited information. This, as you can hear me describing this, and I hope I've done a decent job. I'm not a lipidologist. There are actually doctors who study lipidology and are experts in lipidology. I'm definitely not that, so I'm doing my best to make this understandable and accurate. But it's a system, right? So this is
We're all totally nerding out in here. So, our brains are firing. Keep going.
Stop me if I'm not making sense at that point.
I love this stuff.
So it's a system. There are all different types of lipoproteins floating around. They have different contents. They have different concentrations of triglycerides. They have different amounts of cholesterol. They have, and then there are all different sizes. And this is changing. It's different from one person to the next, and it's different in one person from one moment to the next. It depends on what you've eaten, when you've eaten. It's a very dynamic system. And the lipid panel, all it does is tell you, the traditional lipid panel, all it does is tell you roughly how much cholesterol you have per a certain blood volume from each of these lipoproteins. So you can imagine you could have 100 different types of LDL particles and LDL derived particles, and you just sort of mix them all up and then measure the concentration of cholesterol per a certain blood volume. So that doesn't tell you it doesn't tell you the size of those particles. It doesn't tell you what was in them. It doesn't tell you where they were. It doesn't tell you if they're oxidized. It doesn't tell you if they're glycated. It doesn't tell you any of those things. And then HDL particles, the expert that I've listened to talk about this most recently basically says that we don't know very much about HDL particles and how they function. And there's certainly no consumer-based test to measure HDL function. So you could have a high HDL count, but if you for some reason have dysfunctional HDL particles that aren't doing proper reverse cholesterol transport, then it may not be helping you. So it's just, regardless of all these details, the point is that this judging a person's total long-term cardiovascular risk, your chance of developing heart disease or coronary artery disease or strokes just based on your LDL or your HDL on your lipid panel, it's just too much of an oversimplification. It's not that it's useless information. You just need more information, and you need to think about it. You have to think about it in the context of the person. For example, there are people who have incredibly high LDL counts that don't develop arterial disease, atherosclerosis, and there are people with incredibly low LDL counts that have heart attacks. So it's just not that simple, unfortunately.
Does your body make cholesterol?
Your body does synthesize cholesterol, yes. I believe I'm correct in saying that all of your cells have the ability to synthesize cholesterol.
Does your body make fat?
Your body can make fat, yes.
The reason why I asked that is obviously the ketogenic diet. A lot of people are on that. But this is just my theory. If you have a diet that is devoid of fat, then your body will make the fat for you. And that, in my idea, in my mind, that's not the right kind of fat. Am I correct in that reasoning? Or like if you say, okay, I'm gonna, like, if you got a choice between no fat yogurt or low fat yogurt, which is the better of the two? I've always erred on the right side of have the fat in the yogurt because your body knows what to do with it. Whereas if the fat's not in the yogurt, your body's gonna make it, and that's not what you want.
I think it's completely contextual.
Okay.
So you could come up with a person who I might say, if you're going to eat yogurt, eat low-fat yogurt. So just to back up a little bit, in terms of fats that your body makes versus fats that you eat, I think the main point to make there is that your body can make most of the fat that you need for functional purposes. Like, for example, one of the things that fat is required for is to insulate nerves. I mean, there's a million other things, but that's just the first example that popped into my mind. Your body can make some of those fats, but some of the fat are omega-3 fatty acids that your body cannot make or is very poor at making. And those are the things that you'll hear people refer to as essential fatty acids. So those are things that you have to eat in your diet. And if you don't have enough of them, there's the potential that you could have health problems. So for most other fats, if you eat a relatively diverse diet of any kind, you're not going to be deficient in a certain type of fat, except for these specific essential fatty acids. To address I think the broader question that you raised is, should people eat full fat foods versus low fat foods? I think that's totally contextual. If you're talking about a person who has an essential fatty acid deficiency, then you would want that person to definitely start having those fats in their diet. But if you're talking about a person who doesn't have any particular fat deficiency in their diet and they're trying to lose weight, then giving them more fat in their diet, assuming that all other things being equal, if you're giving them more energy to consume, which is what fat primarily is, it provides energy, it's fuel. It does serve as the building blocks for certain things, but most of it is going to go towards fuel that you're either going to store. You're either going to store that fat in a fat cell somewhere in your body, or you're going to burn it and use it for energy. So if you're consuming excess energy, whether it's in the form of fat, carbohydrate, protein less so, but also protein in any of the three major macronutrients I just listed, if you're consuming excess fuel more than you're using, you will store it as fat. And I mean, some people are trying to gain weight, of course, but I think a lot of people are usually trying to maintain or lose. And so you don't necessarily want to eat excess energy. But if you need, if you have certain macro requirements, full fat yogurt could, I believe, be a very healthy part of your diet. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, I've just, it's my concoction of theories that I have sometimes, and I just want people to set me straight sometimes, because, if you don't, then you can go around and have fake ideas in your head.
Hey guys, we'll get back to the episode in a moment here, but we want to take a quick break to thank our sponsor for this episode, CrossFit Greer. If y'all live in the Greer area and are looking to join a CrossFit box, go ahead and look up Jen and Reagan Green, owners of CrossFit Greer. Mention the Apogee Podcast to them, and they will give 10% off your first month's membership.
We also want to thank Blitz Belts for their continued sponsorship of the podcast. They're offering our listeners a 15% discount at checkout. All you have to do is type in Apogee, all caps. That's APOGEE for your 15% off discount. So what is your opinion of dietary cholesterol?
So I think you asked me earlier if your body can make cholesterol.
Right.
And I said that every cell in your body is capable of synthesizing cholesterol. And there's obviously been a huge amount of debate historically about the danger of dietary cholesterol. Mm-hmm. There used to be previously recommendations that you should minimize your consumption of dietary cholesterol, and then recently that advice has sort of been overturned. And the reason is that, number one, it's not clear that it actually correlates on a population basis with the development of atherosclerosis. And likely the reason for that is that most people don't absorb a lot of the dietary cholesterol that they consume. So cholesterol that you eat from food actually comes as a cholesterol ester or attached to this other chemical group. And in order to absorb the cholesterol from your diet, that ester group has to be cleaved by an enzyme. And then it has to also make it across the enterocyte, that cell in the small bowel wall that we were talking about earlier. And there's a couple things that prevent it from happening. Number one, you may not cleave all those ester groups, and if you don't do that, it's not going to make it across the cell membrane. And then number two, there's a pump that pumps cholesterol back out into the lumen of the small bowel, and then it leaves your body. Mm-hmm. You excrete it from your body, rather than absorbing it into your bloodstream. However, there are people that have variants of these pumps, and so some people don't pump back out as much dietary cholesterol as others, and so some people are hyperabsorbers, some people absorb an average amount, and some people are hypoabsorbers of dietary cholesterol. So that's one of the things I do in some of my clients who have very high or relatively high cholesterol numbers, or have a very high family history of coronary artery disease, is we might look at that person's dietary cholesterol intake and decide to reduce it based on their actual absorption, which you can test.
Let me ask you this. What is your opinion on statins?
The way that statins are used now is sort of based on protocols. Mm-hmm. Most people, if they fit into a certain category,
they're just given to them. You
go through an algorithm of your lipid panel is this, your family history is that, here's your 10-year risk of coronary artery disease, and you're over this certain percentage of risk, so here's your statin. But I think most doctors try to individualize and personalize things as much as they can.
So it sounds like, in general, the old lipid model panel is basically just as useful as the old BMI, right? All CrossFitters would be morbidly obese according to BMI, and it seems like the lipid panel is just very vague when it comes to really diagnosing high cholesterol.
Yeah, it doesn't give you the full picture, and it also doesn't tell you these other aspects of a person's health that will affect how much of the LDL-based cholesterol ends up making it into the artery wall. So, you could imagine, and there are likely such individuals who have perfect blood pressure, perfect metabolic health, perfect balance between their inflammatory and anti-inflammatory cascades. Everything is perfect, and you could pump this person full of LDL particles all day long, and they may never develop atherosclerosis. So if you're looking on a population basis and you know that one of the things that is required for the development of atherosclerosis is LDL particles and their cholesterol getting into the artery wall, if you just look at it on a population basis as, okay, this is one of the things that's involved in the development of atherosclerosis, and then you use a medicine or a nutritional strategy to lower it, population-wide, you should see a benefit. But that doesn't tell you what's going to happen in this one individual versus this one other individual. So if you just want to look at it as I want to decrease my number of heart attacks by 10% in this group of people, you might achieve that. But that doesn't mean you can tell the person sitting in front of you that you actually helped that specific person.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, that all makes sense. I think it's a great answer. During this topic of cholesterol, we were talking a lot about essential fatty acids. One of those being omega-3s, fatty acids. Explain a little bit more about what those are, because that's another thing that's tossed out a lot in the fitness industry. Fish oil. What are the benefits of supplementing and taking fish oil? What are omega-3s exactly?
So there are, and you can think about this in terms of sort of the pharmacologic aspects, because there are actual medications that are omega-3 fatty acids, and they're used as medicines to either reduce long-term risk of cardiovascular disease or to treat high triglycerides. And there's actually a relatively new medicine called Vesipa that some people are using to lower triglycerides in patients with hypertriglyceridemia, high triglyceride levels, and potentially to improve cardiovascular risk. But there's some controversy on whether or not high-dose EPA or high-dose EPA and DHA, which are the two main essential fatty acids, omega-3 fatty acids, that are used in these medications and supplements. So that is controversial, and again, I think there are probably some individuals who benefit from it and some who may not, and I don't know yet exactly how to identify who those are. In terms of supplementation for an average person who's not necessarily using it to reduce the risk of long-term atherosclerosis or to prevent cardiovascular disease, is there a benefit to supplementing omega-3 fatty acids? Again, I don't know. The way that I treat this on an individual basis is you can do an omega-3 index, which looks at the red blood cell membrane and looks at the ratio, it looks at the amount and ratios of EPA to DHA and omega-3 to omega-6 fatty acids in the actual cell membrane of the red blood cell. So you can send a blood test that looks for that. And we know roughly the range that healthy, otherwise healthy people should be in. And so if somebody's way below that, then that's a person who I would try first to make dietary modifications. So the richest, most dense dietary source of omega-3 fatty acids are fatty fish like salmon. And so if this is a person who does not eat any fatty fish, then I'll try to get them to eat a serving or two of salmon every week and then recheck and see what that looks like. Some people are totally unwilling to do that. They hate fish. They're never going to eat salmon. They would rather develop coronary artery disease than eat salmon. So,
salmon is so good.
So for those people, if they have really abnormally low omega-3 fatty acid index, then I may suggest an omega-3 supplement. And then you could spend an entire lifetime researching all the different supplements and the dosing and the sources and everything. There's krill oil, there's fish oil from all different fish, there's cod liver oil, and then there's different amounts of EPA and DHA and different ratios. And then, so it's that you could really get into the weeds with that.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't want to get in the weeds.
So let's talk about something that everybody, 95% of the population do. Coffee.
Uh-huh.
All right. There's speculation that black coffee is good for you or it's not good for you. Either it helps burn calories or it doesn't help burn calories. It helps with mental focus or it doesn't help mental focus.
Yeah.
What is your opinion on...
Everybody's going to hate me after this podcast because I can't answer a single one of these questions. I would love to just say, yes, coffee is the best thing for everyone, because that's what I think most people want to hear, right?
Right.
You guys love your coffee?
Of course.
Yeah, I love coffee too. Unfortunately, again, I'm going to just say that it's more complicated, I think, than it's usually made out to be. And I shouldn't say usually. I mean, I think a lot of people acknowledge that all the questions you're asking me they're complicated questions, and everyone knows about the clickbait articles that say like the 3 things that coffee's
great for your brain, and
right.
You know.
So that's the stuff that we're exposed to on a daily basis. But if you actually go to Google Scholar or go to the scientific literature and search for coffee or caffeine, you'll find articles and you'll very quickly realize how complicated the topic is. So I guess to give just a quick, simple answer up front, I think that coffee can be either neutral or healthy for a lot of people. And I think it's dependent on the person, and I think it's dependent on the dose. So people metabolize caffeine differently.
I don't. I've had a genetic test that basically says that I don't metabolize caffeine well. So I can have a coffee in the morning, but if I have, it takes me forever to get it out of my body.
Yeah.
So I hate that because I like to drink coffee. So I usually have like one every other day.
And you're not alone in that. I don't know the percentage of the population, but I think there's a not insignificant percentage of the population who are slow metabolizers. So, if you drink a coffee, like a regular black coffee, caffeinated, that's going to be roughly 100 milligrams of caffeine for about a 12-ounce coffee, or if you're at Starbucks, double or triple that amount of caffeine. And so let's say I'm a fast metabolizer. I actually don't know if I am or not, other than my subjective experience. But let's say I'm an average or a fast metabolizer. I might have metabolized half of that caffeine in 2 hours. So I might be down to 50 milligrams circulating in 2 hours. It may take you 9 or 10 to do the same thing. So if you had a Starbucks 16 ounce, which I think is over 300 milligrams of caffeine, depending on the roast, then you could have 150 milligrams 10 hours later, potentially, which is a significant dose.
Right.
If you look at certain supplements, sometimes they only have 120 or 250 milligrams of caffeine in the whole. So you know that's a lot to have 150, and then to get down to 75, it may take you another 10 hours. So, and then if let's say you're having coffee every day, you're not even metabolizing the previous day's coffee completely, and now you're having another one. So you're stacking doses potentially.
So let me ask you this to go along with coffee. People like sugar in their coffee, or they like milk in their coffee, or they like. I don't drink sodas. Like I don't drink sugar. I drink diet sodas. I drink unsweetened tea. The only penchant that I have is I put stevia in my coffee. Mm-hmm. As far as artificial sweeteners on the grand scheme of, sugar to Splenda to, Sweet and Low, mm-hmm. where do all those file? I mean, obviously they trick your brain.
Yeah. So I don't think that there's good evidence that small amounts of artificial sweeteners are harmful to humans, mm-hmm. but there is good evidence that larger amounts of artificial sweeteners, and the dose I don't know, but let's say the equivalent of 10 Sweet and Low packets or something like that in a day's time period, there is decent evidence that is doing something to your body that could potentially be inducing insulin resistance or worsening your ability to tolerate glucose loads. And that data comes from a Nature paper in 2014 where they did a study in mice, and they exposed them to, I think, roughly the equivalent of 10 Sweet and Low packets of several different artificial sweeteners, and showed that these mice became intolerant to glucose loads in comparison to the other mice. And then they showed that they could induce it was somehow mediated by the changes to the gut microbiome, which, don't ask me more details about gut microbiome, but the
flora and the fauna of your gut.
The flora and the fauna. They were able to do fecal transplant from the mice who had the non-nutritive sweeteners, which is the formal term for the artificial sweeteners. Non-nutritive meaning they don't actually get absorbed as sugar. Mm-hmm. So they had the non-nutritive sweetener dosed mice, and then they induced this glucose intolerance, and then did a fecal transplant to the other mice, and that was enough to induce the same glucose intolerance in the other mice. And then this was also done with cross-species human fecal transplant into the mice, and again demonstrated. So something's going on there. I think it's another question of dose.
Right.
But when I was thinking about this question, the thing that comes to my mind is why. Because someone would have to tell me a good reason to have one of those artificial sweeteners rather than a reason not to. You know what I mean? My default is...
Do you like sugar in the raw better? I mean, do you like...
Well, I just generally don't add any kind of sweeteners.
Well, see, here's where I come from.
Yeah.
You know, growing up, my grandmother would make tea.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, you know, I'm from the South.
Sure.
So, but she wouldn't do sugar tea. She would do saccharin tea.
Okay.
Which was by far the worst artificial sweetener you can make because it's a derivative of tar, if I'm not mistaken.
I actually don't know. But
So
that's interesting.
I'm just trying to figure out the correlation.
Yeah.
Because I also know that stevia, stevia is more natural, I guess. And then, you know, and Splenda is kind of like a wood alcohol.
Yeah, I think so. Like stevia and monk fruit, for example, I don't think that there's any evidence that those are harmful. That doesn't mean it's not coming, but I think in small amounts, I certainly wouldn't harp on that as some major problem as far as I'm aware. Certainly not an expert on that, but to me, I just try to reduce. If I'm adding something into my nutrition or my diet plan, I have to have a reason for adding it in. And I think we're all like you just said, I mean, I drank soda as a kid and I had all kinds of candy and sweets. And, you know, I thought breakfast cereals were super healthy, but turns out they're not. I mean, like Cinnamon Toast Crunch or whatever. Yeah. So that's the kind of stuff. I grew up eating that stuff. And I had a pretty healthy diet as a kid, I would say, but I ate plenty of that stuff. But when you think about it, really, the default food is what exists naturally, right? And then whatever exists on top of that is man-made. I'm not saying just because it's man-made it's bad. That's not necessarily true, but you'd have to tell me why it's good before I would want to add it back into my nutrition plan. So the way that I eat is I eat nutrient-dense whole foods. And then if I'm going to take a supplement or add sugar or add something else other than what comes naturally in that food, I've got to have a reason I'm doing it. Right. To be fair, one of those reasons could be I just want it because it tastes good. That could be a reason. Mm-hmm. But I'd have to compare that to its effect on my health to decide does this taste good enough and does it have a minimal enough effect on my health for this to be a thing that I would like to do.
As an aside, as far as breakfast food, when I was a kid, my grandfather had grape nuts. And I decided that I was going to sit down and have a big bowl of grape nuts. Why? Because, well, nuts taste like peanut butter and grapes taste like grapes, right? So I'm like, yeah, this is going to be a big bowl of peanut butter and jelly.
False.
No, false advertisement right there.
Dude, that's what we had in our household.
Needless to say, I have yet to eat grape nuts again.
I think the most sugary cereal we had in our household growing up was Raisin Bran. So speaking of which, how important, you know, a lot of people are drinking these energy drinks or whatever. And I think the biggest thing is it's not so much that they're drinking the energy drinks, it's that they're drinking more energy drinks instead of drinking water, which I think that's the biggest thing. You're more dehydrating yourself from actual water than just like over consuming stevia or aspartame or whatever. How much water should people be drinking per day?
Yeah. Again, I'll give the painful answer of it totally depends. I can give my own sort of personal anecdote on hydration that I think might shed a little bit of light on how variable it can be. So when I was in medical school on my surgery rotation, we would go into the operating room, and as the medical student, your job is basically just to retract or snip the loose end of the suture. But you could be in and out of the operating room for a large portion of the day, and it was if you had to pee in the middle of an operation, it was, you know, I mean, you could break scrub and leave the operating room and go to the bathroom and come back, but then you'd have to re-scrub in. It would cause the staff to do work on your behalf, and you're not that important a member of the team. So I didn't want to cause any problems. I wanted to not have to pee basically all day when I was on surgery rotation.
Catheters? Anybody?
Totally an option. I thought of it many times. I'm sure somebody has done that to themselves before. I don't want that. But I did think about it. So I would get up in the morning, you know, at like 4 a.m., go to the bathroom, drink a couple glasses of water, go to the hospital, go to the bathroom maybe one more time before rounds, and then I wouldn't drink or go to the bathroom usually for the rest of the day until I got home in the evening. So, and I mean, at that time how old was I? I was probably 24. So I thought I was fine, but in retrospect, I'm sure I was horribly dehydrated all the time. But after that, I don't get thirsty anymore. It takes me a lot to get thirsty now. So I'll often work an ER shift and I could be 6 or 8 hours in and realize I haven't had anything to drink. And overall, I'm still healthy as far as I know. I haven't had any issues. So that's one end of the spectrum of you can go long periods of time without drinking water and probably still be okay. In terms of what's optimal for hydration, when I have clients that I think, or patients that I think are dehydrated, my advice to them is to basically drink until their thirst is quenched and then monitor urine output. So in the hospital, the way we determine how well someone is hydrated, or one of the ways, is by their urine output. So if you haven't urinated in 6 hours, that means your kidneys are holding on to all the water that they're seeing. There's no excess water for them to excrete. So they're retaining all of the water. If you're urinating every 2 or 3 hours and it's dilute, clear, clear-ish yellow urine, assuming you're healthy and you have normal kidneys and everything, you have excess free water that your kidneys are getting rid of. So you're adequately hydrated. I think the mistake that most people make in terms of trying to hydrate, especially when they're dehydrated, is that usually in a dehydrated state, you're also low on electrolytes. So your body, everyone hears the fact that your body is made mostly of water, but the only reason that water stays in certain compartments inside cells, inside blood vessels, instead of just kind of oozing and seeping into all the spaces in between tissues where it doesn't belong, is that there are proteins and salt, electrolytes that maintain the concentration of water in the different body compartments so that you have the right volume of water where it needs to be. And when people get dehydrated, especially in sport, they're usually losing salt and oftentimes under-consuming salt and over-consuming just water. And in the most extreme cases, this can lead to something called exercise-induced hyponatremia. Have you guys heard of that before?
I haven't, no.
So if you drink, I think the most classic cases are, in marathon runners and triathletes and stuff on a hot day, and they're just drinking, most of what they're taking in is water and not enough salt. And so they're getting all this water in, but they're sweating most of it out. Maybe they're peeing some of it out, and they're diluting the salt concentration in their body. And so you can get down to sodium levels so low that you now start having severe cramps, confusion, even seizures potentially. And that's an extreme case, obviously, but I see it all the time in patients that just have gastrointestinal illnesses and they're trying to hydrate with just water, and what they really need is something salty like soup broth or an oral rehydration solution, or there's a million products on the market now for.
All right, moving on. So a lot of people in the fitness industry are now wearing Whoops, right? And there's certain things on the Whoop that are, right away, like, okay, resting heart rate. I understand that. There's one reading on there called HRV. And I think a lot of people, that's very new. They don't really understand exactly what HRV is and what that has to do with their recovery. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So HRV stands for heart rate variability. So I think everyone probably knows that heart rate just refers to how many beats per minute your heart is doing. So resting heart rate, just sitting in a chair, typical resting heart rate would be 60 beats per minute. Some people who are more highly trained or who have low resting heart rates could be in the 40s, sometimes in extreme cases the 30s, and other people might be 80s, 90s. So heart rate variability is actually the variance in the difference of the time between those beats. So if you have 60 beats a minute, the average time between beats is 1 second, right? But not every beat is exactly 1 second before or after the next or the previous beat. So there's a slight variability. So you could have 0.8 in between two beats, and then 1.1 in between two beats, and then 0.9. So, and then there's different ways of measuring, of reporting heart rate variability. So you could average those out. You could report the variance. You could report the standard deviation. You could report what I think Whoop uses is the root mean square of the heart rate variability. And this is a measure of what it's trying to do is get an idea of the activity of your sympathetic versus your parasympathetic nervous system. So your heart rate is governed by these two separate parts of your nervous system. And I think the terms that people typically hear are the fight or flight, referring to the sympathetic nervous system. And I don't even remember, what do people call the parasympathetic nervous system? I don't know the other term for that, but it's the part of your nervous system that basically slows down your heart rate and slows down all these other processes that would typically be associated with the fight or flight response. And if you have high parasympathetic tone, meaning that the vagal nerve, which is the main nerve that communicates to the heart to tell it how fast to beat from the parasympathetic nervous system, you're going to have a slower heart rate, lower heart rate, and you're going to have an increased variability from beat to beat. So instead of every beat being exactly 1 second, you may have a much greater variability in how far apart each beat is. So that's a reflection of the activity of the parasympathetic nervous system. If you now are working out or under stress or sleep deprived or on stimulants like caffeine, or any other variety of stimuli that are going to cause some sort of a stress response, or you're recovering from exercising, you're dehydrated, now you're going to have adrenal hormones like epinephrine and norepinephrine secreted into your bloodstream, which stimulate your heart cells to beat faster. And as they beat faster, it will also decrease the variability, the beat to beat variability. And so that will be reflected in this measurement of HRV. So the more recovered you are, the more rested you are, the less stressed you are, the better hydrated you are, all these, you're not sick. Your sympathetic nervous system will have low activity and parasympathetic will be high, and then you'll have a lower resting heart rate and a higher heart rate variability, and then your Whoop recovery score will be 92, green, good to go, versus
the ultimate biohack to Whoop right here. Now everybody's gonna stop drinking energy drinks, coffee. Everybody's gonna be flushing themselves with water before bed.
Well, yeah.
No, I think that was the best explanation of HRV I've ever heard.
Oh, well, there's a lot out there. I mean, Whoop has their own podcast, and they have that, so I appreciate it, but I'm sure there's...
I think you topped that one because I actually listened to that one, and this one made more sense.
Okay, well, I'll take it, I guess.
Good job, Dr. Steve. You did it.
Oh, so I think one of the other things I think you wanted me to, or that we were talking about before on HRV was that some people have a low range of HRV. So like my HRV is actually pretty low. Even when I'm recovered, a good HRV for me is like 45. Whereas some of my friends are 100, 150.
Right.
And does that mean that I'm not as good of an athlete or not as fit as that person? Maybe. In the case of me and my one friend I'm referring to, it's definitely the case. I'm a much lesser of an athlete, but it's not necessarily true. It's a very individual marker. So you have to look at yourself compared to yourself.
Sure.
And not get hung up on, okay, well, most 34-year-old men have a heart rate variability in the 50s and I'm in the 30s, which is true for me. And does that mean something's wrong with me? No, not necessarily.
You just got to look at what's your normal. And if it starts to deviate from your normal, then you know something's up and you have to change it.
Right. And that's what Whoop and these other devices do, is they don't compare you to the average for your age group or something like that. They compare you to your prior self. And that's how they tell you if you're recovered or not, based on the trend of your scores, essentially.
I think something interesting people talk about a lot regarding Whoops is they see their recovery score, they look at their HRV, their resting heart rate, their breathing, all that. And then they look at the actual cycles of sleep that they had and like, man, I was in REM and slow wave sleep for a very long time. How can my recovery be 33%?
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about what's going on in these 3 cycles of sleep between light sleep, REM, and SWS, and how that correlates with your recovery a little bit.
Well, I'm going to defer some of the details on this, and maybe I can give you some expert resources on sleep staging and stuff like that. But in terms of overall looking at the sleep stages on a fitness tracker or sleep tracker like a Whoop bracelet or any other similar product, my understanding from experts who I've listened to on this topic is that they're not necessarily super accurate in terms of actual sleep staging. Maybe they are sometimes for some people, But what they're much better at is telling you how long you were asleep and when you were awake. So when you see those disturbances or those times when you were awake at night on your Whoop app graph in the morning, those are probably fairly accurate. But in terms of how much slow wave sleep and how much REM, I don't know. And certainly the data there's a lot of things that can affect the data. Like I know I've had the bracelet on too loose or displaced, and it can drastically affect the way that it analyzes your sleep staging. I think it's undoubtedly true that you need adequate sleep for recovery, and it's probably the most underutilized quote unquote performance enhancer. I think most people, if people are like me, you don't sleep enough. I know how important sleep is, and I'm just trying to get a lot of things done, and I don't want to go to bed at night. So
what do you tell people? I hear this frequently. My body doesn't require a lot of sleep to operate. Like, what do you tell those people? You're wrong. It
depends. I guess it certainly seems like there are some people, since we mentioned it earlier, the Jocko podcast. If you listen to him talk about sleep, I think, I would love to be like that. It sounds like he sleeps 5.5, 6 hours a night, maybe. And he's obviously an incredibly productive individual. I don't know how many people are truly like that. It certainly doesn't seem like there's many people like that, but maybe there are some. And just because your body is operating, I don't know if that's the standard that you want to judge yourself on. Like, of course I can operate on 4 or 5 hours of sleep for a lot of days in a row, and I've done it, but it doesn't feel good, and I'm certainly not my smartest, fastest thinking self on those days. You can get used to it, doesn't mean it's good.
I think it's amazing. I think basically what it all boils down to, from what I'm getting from you, is that, and it's true, everybody's different, and everything in context to everybody, whether it works for them or not, is going to be different for the next person.
Yeah, and obviously there's some, people are more similar than they're different, but there are obviously important differences and important contexts. So what's good for one person at one time may not be exactly what another person needs, or may not be what you need next year. You might need something a little different. So
that's what Harris and I always tell people in our practice. One shoulder is not the equivalent to the other shoulder. What you did to your shoulder might be completely different to the other person that their shoulder might be hurting as well. But are we going to prescribe the two types of treatment? Probably not. There's not just one big overhead. We got to look at the whole picture and see what's exactly going on. I think that's the answer for everything in the body.
I think it's just amazing in general, as someone who's just a layman, just a regular Joe. I think it's amazing how science has evolved so much just in the past 20 years. It's obviously it has its good parts and it has its bad parts, but as far as everything, it's amazing. We're talking about, Apogee globulins, and it's like everybody knows what we're talking about, but to an extent we do. And it's how does that, and you can attest to this too. How does that help? Like somebody comes in off the street, and they got their internet doctor degree. They think they know everything. How does that affect you guys, in your practice, David? And in your practice, how do you dispel those myths to those people?
Well, I actually love it when people come in and they've looked something up, even if it's, completely wrong or oversimplified. I think that the temptation is to be frustrated by it. And there is that. There's a lot of bad information or just things that are sort of true, but just overly simplified, which it's necessary. Things get overly simplified because it's kind of necessary to present something understandable that's appealing to a lot of people that they want to click and read on. It has to get simplified. Most people are not going to want to read a 300-page textbook on lipidology.
Right.
So that's what people get exposed to if they're not doing dedicated research or formal training. They're going to get exposed to these oversimplified things and potentially apply it to themselves in the wrong context. But that actually makes me happy when someone comes in and asks me about that, because then I know that my starting point is this person's genuinely really interested. They care. They're trying to learn. They're trying to understand. And so that's what I focus on. And it's just an incremental process. I'm constantly learning stuff that I learned a year or two ago has been updated and changed, and so it's not like I have everything figured out. So I like it when people ask me about those things, just like you guys are asking me stuff now.
Yeah, I agree. I think that when people come into the clinic, I have to understand that, I studied the human body. I'm an expert in human body biomechanics, right? I am not an expert in cars, right? So like when I take my car to the mechanic and I say it's not working, and they're like, well, it's just this alternator and then it's this and this. I'm like, I don't know what they're talking about. Same thing when people come into the clinic. Like I have to understand that not everybody understands there's a femur in your leg, right? And I know earlier I said there's people that come in our clinic that doesn't know there's 3 major bones in your leg. I'm not trying to say that in a demeaning way. Like, I don't know how my Apple computer works, I just know that it works, and I think a lot of people are the same way with the human body. Like they don't know exactly how it works. They just know it works and when it's not working. And so kind of to explain that to folks, and then, what like Steve was saying, when somebody comes in and they're like, they start rattling off some things that they found on the internet, that does show me that they are genuinely interested in getting better and helping me help them fix the issue, right? Because doctors don't fix people. Doctors lead them to water, and people have to fix themselves.
How frustrating is it for both of you to have a patient, or have you experienced a patient that comes in and basically says, well, I need this pill or whatever, and they take it and it didn't happen overnight? How frustrating is that to you as a doctor?
Well, I can say in my experience, I think it's a little different for me because, he's a medical doctor. So when he prescribes medicine, a lot of times it does help pretty quickly, especially if it's like a pain medication or something like that, right? For me, I'm a physical therapist, so it takes time for the body to adapt. Nothing can get fixed with a quick adjustment, right? It might feel better for the short term, but it doesn't fix it long term. I think that's something that people have a hard time realizing, that you can't just come in somewhere, get a quick adjustment, and then all of a sudden you're better. You'll be back to me in 4 weeks, right?
Right.
We've got to work on fundamental biomechanic issues that are going on, whether it be in the actual shoulder joint or the surrounding musculature or your spine or your, anything really. We got to look at the whole thing, and we've got to work on that. And we have to be consistently working on that. If we're not consistently working on that, the body will not adapt and the body will not change. So that's my spiel on that.
So I don't know if I get frustrated when medicines don't work right away, but what I will say is that I've learned, one of the reasons I went into emergency medicine was that you can fix things very quickly. And when I say fix, unfortunately, usually you're not fixing the underlying problem. In the case of like a laceration repair, you are, and that's amazing. Somebody comes in with a cut, you suture it, they're essentially fixed. They still have to heal, but that's a very clear-cut problem, very simple solution, immediately done. And so that was one of the reasons I loved emergency medicine, was a lot of other fields of medicine require, long-term plans, a lot of patience, a lot of working with people. And even then, oftentimes you don't get the results you want. And so that was, difficult for me to take. So I picked emergency medicine, and now I'm doing my private practice, and it's the complete opposite.
I guess what I meant to say was, how much do you come up against instant gratification?
A little bit, yes. Yeah. And people want, I think everybody, myself included, want the instant solution, right? If you could press a button and, be able to deadlift 600 pounds and have, the exact physique that you want and be immortal, you would want that right now. You would want to press that button. But I think people know that stuff takes work, but they're hoping that it takes less work than it usually takes. And so I think for the most part, people are really reasonable, and they're not, there are some people who just, they don't think that they can do these long-term processes to get better, or they're not mentally in that place yet, and so they want a medicine because they think it's going to fix the problem sooner. But I think most people eventually realize that that's not really a viable strategy. And I'm being vague, so
No.
so but like a specific thing that I was going to mention is in nutrition is probably the closest analog to what I do that's similar to physical therapy, which is just you can eat well for a week, or you can do a nutrition plan for a week, and then if you don't continue with that plan for basically the rest of your life, and now you go off and do some harmful nutrition plan, that's not going to work for you. So some people don't fully appreciate that a lot of these things in terms of nutrition and training and physical therapy and mobility, all that, it's an every single day. There's no break. I mean, you can have a...
Exactly. That's one of the things we try to preach to people is, you can come in here for 4 to 6 weeks, continue 2 to 3 times a week, and you will most likely feel quite a bit better when you're done. But if you don't continue to do the things that we teach you while you're in here, not everything, but you find like those 5 or 6 things that really you latch onto, it's just like brushing your teeth, right? We don't brush our teeth because we have cavities. We brush our teeth because we don't want cavities, right? So like if we learn a good way to prevent this shoulder pain from happening, let's keep doing it,
Yeah, and you can't make a person want that. People have to say. But for most people, it's a journey. People come, like a lot of times what happens is people come in with a problem. They want their problem fixed. So you work with them to try to fix their problem. And then once they get into a better state, hopefully now they want more. They see what's possible. They see they can be better. And then, in your case, maybe they've got their mobility back and now they've got some strength and now they want to be stronger. And then they see that they could do more. And every day you realize, okay, I did that. Now I can do more. And for me, that's how I treat myself and my clients is whenever you get to, your problem is fixed, or you got to the stage that you thought you wanted to get to, hopefully now you realize, okay, well, I did that. Now what can I do? And you just keep trying to get better.
That's what I always tell people. I hate when I ever hear an analogy of you're like a car. We are nothing like cars, right? like I said, if your alternator is not working, you put an alternator back in, it's working. The difference between us and a car is if something's broken, we can fix it. But our bodies are constantly evolving. We're living, breathing organisms that adapt and evolve. And as long as your brain is functioning and you're breathing, you can progress. So there's really not a plateau. I mean, we're amazing beings, unlike something that's plastic and metal like a car, which isn't amazing at all. Some folks it is very amazing.
True. I was laughing when you said that because I have a lot of car analogies for human physiology.
Oh no! Don't tell me that.
But one thing you just made me think of was that you can constantly adapt and improve, and there's no plateau. And I think that is one thing that really frustrates people is they can do the right thing for a long period of time and not see significant progress. And what I often try to make those people notice is that, well, if you hadn't been doing those things, how much worse would you be? Because unfortunately, as you age, things tend to get worse if you do nothing. So if you're maintaining, that is progress. Maintenance is progress. So, and for a lot of people, that's the best you might be able to do. And that's fine. That's great.
So speaking of success, and let's kind of sort of turn it down a little bit, but let's get to know you on a couple of questions towards here. What is your greatest success so far in life, you think?
That is a very easy answer, and that's definitely marrying my wife is my greatest success.
Somebody wants to have a good weekend. No.
It's 100% true. She's just an amazing, brilliant, really, really tough woman, just incredibly honest, and so for her to choose me, for me to achieve that is definitely my greatest success.
So that goes right into the next question. Who is Steve Kornweiss, the husband?
I think I'm going to defer to her on that one. I mean, maybe you could have her on someday.
How about this? I like this question better. So you guys are both doctors. You guys are both very busy schedules. What do you guys do to make time for each other so that your relationship maintains, a healthy relationship?
We both just try to take care of ourselves, essentially. So she's incredibly independent. I'm independent, probably less so than she is, but we both have our goals and our things that we want to do. And we just try really hard to take care of ourselves and do what we need to do, take care of ourselves as individuals, physically, emotionally, mentally, so that when we are together, it's, obviously it's not like we don't have issues or problems or things to sort through sometimes, but ideally is, okay, you take care of your business, I'm going to take care of my business. And now when we're together, we can just relax and have, a romantic, nice, fun, enjoyable time and not be trying to cope with disasters or problems. So I think most of what we try to do is really just respect and support the other person as an individual, and then just take care of your own stuff.
What is the perfect Saturday for the Kornweisses?
I don't know. I'm probably in the ER on two out of every 3 or 4 Saturdays.
On the off chance you guys are both home on a Saturday night with nothing to do the next day.
We'll watch movies. Mm-hmm. We'll watch TV shows together. We cook. We both like to cook. It's hard to think now because these days that's about all there is to do.
So what's your go-to meal to cook?
Simple stuff. Steak, burgers, ribs. I have a Weber kettle, so nice. I'll smoke ribs or pork butt.
Yep.
We eat a fair amount of eggs. We also have a lot of vegetables and salads. We keep it really simple. Occasionally we'll prepare something that's a little bit more elaborate, but it's usually a meat that we try to prepare really nicely, cook it perfectly, season it nicely, but pretty simple, or fish, and then a couple vegetables, and that's just, roasted vegetables or something. It's pretty simple.
That's awesome. Is there anything else that you personally like to do outside of fitness and medicine? Do you have any outside hobbies? Or is this something that you're trying to develop? I
think I used to, but I decided, a little over a year ago when I started this practice that I just wanted to spend basically every minute of my time that I can manage to focus on it, working on that. So since I've started that, I've basically dropped my other hobbies. I used to do photography and rock climbing, and we used to go hiking more and travel a little bit more. And I still like doing those things, but it's more important to me to, when I look back 30 years from now, I want some pictures of me hiking and stuff like that, but I mostly want to see that I spent as much time as I possibly could learning and building something so that I have something to show for all the time. So
but to preface that, you are going to get into hunting next year with me, right?
Yeah. We'll see.
All right. Sounds good. Well, speaking of all that, building the practice, how can folks get in touch with you if they're interested in exploring an opportunity with you being their doctor? Tell the folks how they can manage that.
So my practice is very originally named Kornweiss Medical, and the website is kornweissmedical.com.
How do you spell Kornweiss for all these folks?
It's Kornweiss.
Okay, cool.
S as in Sierra.
Awesome. Are you on Instagram or?
I am on Instagram. Yep. So the website is kornweissmedical.com. I'm Steven Kornweiss, all one word, on every social media platform: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. So you can find me there. And there's a couple contact forms on the website that you can message me through, or you can probably go to just call up David.
Yeah, absolutely. I just to preface this a little bit, I first heard about Steve Kornweiss. I probably should have said this at the beginning, but I treated his dad actually. He was a patient of mine in physical therapy, and so his dad obviously loves his son very much. I felt like I knew Steven Kornweiss before I actually met Steven Kornweiss. But everything that your dad has said has upheld. I think he's an amazing guy. If anybody is looking for somebody that's truly interested in preventing disease development and enhancing performance in any way, whether it be fitness, physical, or mental, I think Dr. Kornweiss here would be somebody you should research and possibly get in touch with.
We could ask you a million questions. I'd like to have him on again.
Yeah, there's so many different topics that we could talk about. I think you did an awesome job of hitting a lot of the topics that we wanted to. And folks, I'm sure if you have any more questions for him, you can reach out to him and he can give you more specific information.
You guys are very kind.
Yeah, man. That being said, anything else you want to say before we close?
No, I agree with what you just said there. I'm working on producing a bi-weekly newsletter now. And so I'd like to put out information that people find useful. So if people do have more questions on the stuff that I talked about on the podcast or specific topics they want to hear about, I'd love to get that information so that I can produce a useful newsletter.
All right, awesome. Well, you heard it here.
Apogee Podcast.